Namaste to everyone, all the brothers and sisters, co travelers on the path of the infinite. So, just a brief introduction so that after which we can take up the questions. Some are already there with me. Philosophy is the effort of the mind to arrive at knowledge, just as religion is the effort of the heart and the life instincts to discover something which is beyond the human frame and put it into practice in life. So, philosophy is the effort of the mind. Ordinarily, philosophy begins with sense observations, perception, to which we apply reason and thereby arrive at some kind of a philosophical system. This is the approach primarily taken in the West. In India, it is called darshan. So, we believe that sense observation and intellectual knowledge is not sufficient to arrive at knowledge itself. So, here philosophy is based on the soul perception. So, it's become spiritual philosophy. That's how scriptures come into existence. They are born out of the vision of the soul, the spiritual experience, and then with that spiritual experience, one tries to understand what this world is and what is the relation between what one has experienced and this world. So, two, three things here to make it clear. It's an effort to understand what kind of knowledge. One, who am I? This is a fundamental knowledge. Second, what is this world in which we inhabit? And third, what is the relation between me and the world? This is the basic aspect of philosophy. Now, in the Western philosophy, by and large, we remain confined within this circle. In Indian thought, we go back to another level, and which is there a source, the origin to this world? In Western thought also it is there, but it's like ultimately it ends up largely in agnosticism because there is no mental way to really understand what could be the possible source. Well, there is a source which we may not be able to know. But in Indian thought, there is yoga, and yoga leads us to a kind of first a direct experience of the divine, or rather an indirect contact leading to direct experience, and then degrees of identification with the divine. And then from each of these peaks, we look upon creation and ourselves and understand, readjust, reorient ourselves to who we are and the life we lead and this world that is in existence. So, based on that, we have several schools of philosophy which have come up. So, though we see that there is a kind of sometimes quarrel between these, but they are just three or four different vantage points from which one is seeing the infinite, because the one is infinite and one single vision, one single experience doesn't exhaust him. So, for example, we have the classical Advaita experience of philosophy where there is only one, and all other phenomenal existence, phenomenal experience based on perception, based on cognition, they are all ultimately are resolved back into the one, drawn back. So it's a kind of monism, and the classical example is the sea and the waves. Now waves look as if they are different existence, but next moment they collapse and they are one with the sea. So this is the classical Advaita, where there is an illusion of separateness, and this separateness collapses back into the ocean and has to become one with the ocean. So this is the classical Advaita. Then there is a qualified monism, which is Visishta Advaita. So what is Visishta Advaita? It's like the light and the vibration. They are one. But at the same time, each vibration, though it is from the same source, there is a ultimate identity. Yet it is different when it comes to manifestation. So it accepts the manifestation, doesn't call it an illusion, but always remembers that ultimately there is a basic identity or oneness. And then there is, of course, Dvaita. Now, Advaita is the example that Sri Aurobindo gives us, which is a wonderful example, is that there is the infinite, which is in its own right exists, and the finite. Now, there is a constant attraction between the two, and they are pulled towards each other. Now, the beauty, the simile that comes is of the river entering into the sea. So, there is a point where the river merges into the sea, attracted by the sea, helplessly. But river has its distinct identity and the ocean has its distinct identity. It is not like the waves and the ocean. It is not like the light and the vibration. They are two very distinct things. And yet the two have a tendency to be drawn. So when we seek pure knowledge, then we see Advaita appeals because we want to arrive at that kind of oneness. When we seek some principle of action, then we see that Visishta Advaita, because there is a difference in unity. And when we seek the divine through the emotions, through a kind of attraction, through love, then we see that Dvaita, where one the advantage of Dvaita is like one is adoring the adored. Though eventually one knows that the adorer and the adored are one. And yet there is the joy of this adoration, this service. So these are three different vantage points. Then there are several sub-schools. Then of course there is the philosophy of Sankhya, and we'll touch upon it as and when probably there are some questions also. But these are the three principal schools. But then there are unanswered questions in these schools. For instance, if there is an essential oneness, how come differentiation came into existence? So in a classical Advaita, it's like, there is the imposition of Maya. There is no, oneness is never really lost, but there is a sense of seeming of differences, multiplicity, which is a kind of illusion, a trick of the ego, and get rid of this illusion and there is oneness. Now this creates certain problems, both practical and metaphysical. If there is only such a state, multiplicity is just an illusion, then by one person's withdrawal into the one, there would be a complete cessation of existence. Second problem with this is that if there is no real individuality, whether egoistic or the deeper soul individuality, if it's just an illusion, then who gets liberated, who is bound, who is free, who is making the effort to freedom? So this is the second big question that comes with it. With Visishta Advaita, again, it's nice that there is a differentiation as well as a unity. But why this differentiation come about? For what purpose? And all three schools eventually strive towards the unity with the divine, union with the divine in some form or the other. But the big challenge here is that why all this creation, why go into all this, why the soul has to experience, if there is a soul at all, to start with that state, that if there is a soul at all, why it goes through all this drama of experiencing through lives. And after all these lives, it goes back to a state which it already was. Now, even if we say that individual soul realizes certain kind of perfection which is inherent in the one, and it has to go through it and realize its own perfection, then after the perfection, when it merges into the divine, then what purpose is all this creation about? So what is this entire, and this cosmos is not just an ordinary cosmos, it's you can see the dance of Shakti in it. So there have been attempts to reconcile it. One such attempt to reconcile it, of course, we know is the Chatushpad Brahman, that it is one Brahman, but this one reality is in four different states of consciousness. It expresses itself. So one is the waking state, in which we have the Virat. Waking, of course, is not just our waking state, but the outer material existence. So that which is tangible, perceivable by the senses, and that there is a perception based on which there is this wonderful, magnificent galaxies, stars drifting in space, and all the things that the senses can perceive. So this is the Virat, who is vast. Then there is, behind Virat, there is another. So there is the soul of this material nature. Then there is, behind the Virat, there is Hiranyagarbha. So Hiranyagarbha is the conceptual truth. Here, there is the self which conceives all things and creates. So material universe as the creation, this is the creation, and then there is the creator. So creator is the Hiranyagarbha, and this is the second level, the Swapnavastha, in which things are taking shape. They have not taken complete shape, but they are beginning to take shape, and they are coming closer and closer to earth, and then they express themselves. And then there is a third level at which it is causal. So we have the world of perception, then the world where things have been conceived and put into play, the creative consciousness, so perceptive consciousness, the creative consciousness, and then we have the causal consciousness, which is pragya, out of which a selection is taken by Hiranyagarbha, out of which a selection is brought out into the material universe and this wonderful creation. And there is a fourth, which is absolute, which is, though it has given a sanction to this paradox of creation, yet it is above and transcends it. So one of the questions was with regard to these four states. So the typical sannyasin, the old traditional sannyasin's viewpoint is that though this is a way to say in very wonderful terms that basically it is that one which has come right out up to the material creation. So we have to understand that play. But the typical solution the sannyasin offers is that these are lesser and lesser, and we should go back to the original Turiya state and be done with Virat, done with Hiranyagarbha, the waking, the sleep, and the the dream and the sleep state, pragya, and then be absorbed in that ultimate absolute. Now, this kind of a solution is, Sri Aurobindo does not accept it because it is not a unifying solution. So, ultimately, knowledge, the purpose of knowledge is to unite. So, this solution divides what is one. The Upanishad is saying it's one reality. It is not saying it is two realities or four realities. It's Chatushpad. There is one reality which expresses on all these four planes. But when we try to say that ultimately in trance we go into the absolute, then again the mind has created a schism between creation and creator. So this is, not acceptable in Sri Aurobindo's thought. Then there is another attempt to synthesize, and that is a beautiful attempt which Sri Aurobindo takes at great length, which also I see there were some questions. It is done in the Gita. So in the Gita, the divine has a threefold poise. It's about, when we speak about Sharobhav, Akshar and Purushottama, it is with relation to with nature. It is a bhava. We'll come to the soul aspect a little later. So the divine enters into the mutable world of becomings. So Shar is becomings. It's ever changing, ever changing. Shar, it's nothing which, it is born, it comes into existence and then it goes away, passes out of existence into some state of unknowable. So in this constant becoming, the divine is flowing in its current. So that is the Shar Bhav. And as it flows in the current, it seems as if he is bound by it. But actually, Prakriti is yet being dictated by this secret will which is present in the Sharobhav, because it's the divine. So he's there and Prakriti is doing his bidding, even though it seems that basically he is at the mercy of Prakriti. And to take a typical example, please don't take it as an absolute example. And it's the relation between a man and a woman in a house. So the woman knows what the man likes to eat. Well, nowadays we can change the example because it's the age of Shakti. So man is preparing things in the house. But let's take the traditional example where a woman is preparing things in the house and the man comes and he's sitting. So what is he doing? He is waiting for the meal. Whatever the woman has cooked, he eats it. But mind you, she is still doing what he actually would love to eat. So that is a kind of relation where outwardly to a person who is just looking at appearances, it would seem there is a Prakriti who is just doing things arbitrarily and the Purusha is subject to it, but he is never really a subject. Still, it is his will which is being done. It's like a child to whom the mother provides everything and the child yet the mother is taking into consideration all that the child needs to grow up. So this is one, the Sharobhav. Beyond the Shar, there is the immutable, Brahman, the impersonal, vast extension, that which has the ability to separate completely from the field of nature and become the witness. In Sharobhav, the divine seems to be plunged in multiplicity and lost there, as if he is lost. In the mutable becomings, he is flowing with it. But in immutable, the Akshara Brahman, he is separating himself from this nature, entire field of nature. So he is freed, he is in a state of utter freedom, and ordinarily this is where the Sankhya doctrine comes in, that the Sharobhav, it doesn't use that word, but it's because the movements of Prakriti are reflected in the Purusha. When the Purusha withdraws back, it's like that story of Narcissus where he's looking into the pond and he sees his own image and confuses it to be himself. And feels that the image he is moving when the waves are undulating. But he can suddenly withdraw himself from that and realize that actually it is not he. He is the same immobile witness to this whole drama. And when he does that, there is the freedom. Now there a big problem comes is that, well, if that be the case, what does a person do? So one method was to withdraw from the mutable into the immutable. Another was to alternate between two states. So yogins would often speak about that, the karma which is still required, either the shesh karma or which has to be exhausted, they must continue doing but stay in a state of witness. Time to time they withdraw into this immutable and be done with it. But the Gita takes this reconciliation to another step. So it says, other than the Shar and the Akshar and superior to them, and one that holds the other two in its own vast embrace, is the Purushottama, the Uttam Purusha. And the Gita calls it as the Uttam Rahasya. It is the greatest secret. It brings in the Uttam Purusha who has the Akshara and the Shar. Akshara is nothing else but, he has become this Akshar Brahm. And that's why when Arjuna asked Sri Krishna that, well, tell me which is those yogins who strive by tapasya toward the Akshar Brahm, where do they go? And Shri Krishna says they too come to me, because even Akshar Brahm is nothing else but it is the Purushottama who has taken that poise. He says they too come to me because Shri Krishna has told Arjuna earlier that Akshar Brahma Paramam. It's better to arrive at knowledge than work. So Arjuna is a bit taken aback. What should I do? So he says they too strive. Ultimately they too come to me. But what I am telling you is a more complete path. Why? Because the Purushottama is not just beyond Akshara, but he has become the Akshara and the Shara. So it is he who is manifesting himself in this creation, and therefore the purpose of creation is no more mukti. Mukti, yes, freedom from ignorance is a fundamental realization that one has to have, freedom from the Sharobha, but it is about the Lok Sangraharth. Sarva Bhutani, in all becomings, it is the divine who is there, and what is he doing? He is manifesting. Therefore, Shri Krishna brings this new wonderful, I won't use the word conception, but the truth of Leela. So it's not Maya. In fact, he says it's my Maya. You can't go beyond it. It is Leela. And what is Leela? Leela is a manifestation of the divine in creation and through creation. So what is nature up to? Nature is manifesting all that is there in the ultimate divine reality. And then we understand the Chatusprad Brahman in a new way. We start looking at it from above downwards. That's what the Gita speaks of the Ashwat tree. So there is this ultimate reality, the absolute, and it connects with Pragya. So all that is there within it as possibility, infinite possibility, Pragya draws a selection out of that. And maybe for a particular 4 cycles, Chatur Yoga. Out of that, the Hiranyagarbha draws still certain possibilities, and then out of that possibilities, certain things get manifested in the material universe. What has this got to do with our soul, individual life? The same thing, because there are only 2 immutable realities. One is the infinite and the second is the finite soul. So they are the ones, immutable realities. So they ultimately, even the finite soul goes through all the same stages, and it has all these 3 or 4 possibilities. One is it is completely submerged by nature when it is anish. It's a little baby. The soul is the jiva, the jivatma. Where does it come from? It is not Sharobhav. Sharobhav is relation of the divine with Prakriti. Something similar happens to the soul. So this soul has emerged as a portion of the divine. Para Prakriti Jiva Bhuta. It is the divine mother who has brought the soul out of the supreme divine. It's a portion of the divine, and therefore it has entered into this mutable world of becomings. Why has it entered into this world? To help the process of the divine manifestation. To express, to manifest something of the divine. So perfection here is not the perfection of withdrawal from this universe into the ultimate reality, which is in a way a perfection which is meaningless because the divine is already perfect. But an expression of that perfection which is inherent in the divine in existence in the manifested universe. So in the first step, it is anish, it is covered by Prakriti, it doesn't know itself, and yet even though it seems that Prakriti is dragging the Purusha, the little soul, here and there and everywhere, yet is it actually making it grow. So all experiences of life are essentially to help it grow and reach a point where it begins to question itself, who am I? Then this enters into Sakshi. So just like we have the Sharobhav and we have the Akshara, so the individual soul has these 2 poises which is very similar to that. One is Anish, it is not Ish, it is not Lord. It is as if driven by the mutability of nature. And if one looks at it purely from the surface nature point of view, one believes that there is no soul. Because all that one sees is a movement of nature. That's how Buddha saw it. But there is this element which is flowing with nature. Sometimes when you see the play of sunlight or the moonlight over waters, you will get this experience that water is flowing, but something, a ray, a little droplet of the moon or the sun is also flowing with it. It's very interesting. So it is something of the divine, as a portion is flowing within it, seems to be bound, and yet it is a portion of the divine and can free itself. So then the next step is when it becomes Sakshi. So when it becomes a Sakshi, it has the possibility of merging with the immutable Brahman, the Akshar Brahman, and be dissolved out of creation. But it has a third possibility, and that is of becoming the Ish, the Lord. So we have these two words very interesting which I used, Prabhu and Vibhu. So Prabhu is Lord. But the Lord is not just above. He is also Vibhu. He is the all-encompassing reality. So we have the Prabhu and the Vibhu. So when the soul becomes the Ish, then it becomes a master of nature, and it can express, it can participate in the play as a Jivan Mukt. It's completely, the whole chapter on Nirvana and works in the world. It is inwardly free, and outwardly it is doing nothing else but the bidding of the divine who is beyond, the bidding of the Purushottama, the typical image of Krishna and Arjuna, Nar Narayana. He is living in the divine consciousness. So he is Mad Bhava, Mad Gata. This is a higher possibility for the human soul, which has been revealed to us in the Gita. But then again the question remains, but still, what is this manifestation? To what extent it will go? What we see is the play of three gunas, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. So if these gunas remain the same, the soul, when it is acting, it will still come within this framework and act, even though it is inwardly free. Meaning thereby that one may have gone beyond the law, but when one operates, one is still within the law. You cannot change it. So there Sri Aurobindo brings in that this nature itself, this inferior nature, Apara Prakriti, itself has come from Para Prakriti. So Apara Prakriti is the first stage of our schooling, and then to manifest the Para Prakriti, which Sri Krishna speaks of his own Prakriti. It is his Prakriti. So that must manifest through the individual soul, and therein the development of the individual soul into a psychic being, which becomes the nodus through which the Para Prakriti can act, manifest and transform earthly life. Now this aspect of the individual soul manifesting the Para Prakriti, and what is Para Prakriti but nothing else but divine nature, and that includes basically is the supramental truth. What is the supermind? Supermind is the divine nature. It is omniscience, it is omnipotent, it has within it the intensities of divine love, divine ananda. All aspects of the divine, infinite aspects are there united in the supermind. So we can simply use the word divine consciousness, divine nature, but right now it is covered by a veil, because we were still going under the schooling process of Apara Prakriti. The Gita hints at this higher possibility, but doesn't take us through the door, because while in the lower nature we have to act according to Swabhava and Swadharma. What is Swabhava? It is the divine own in the mutable world. It is something of that impulsion is embedded in the soul. So that's why it is Swabhava and Swadharma, based on which we act, and even though we act within the circumscribed boundaries of nature, yet we can become inwardly free through that process by living life like that. But Sri Aurobindo speaks of transformation of the gunas themselves, because lower prakriti is nothing else but a lower current, and we can take it like this, that in olden times when the electrical current started, so we had this wiring, we had these bulbs, and I think some of us may have experienced the bulbs were 40 watt, 60 watt bulb was considered very good, 100 watt was like ultimate limit. And if somebody it used to consume a lot of electricity, but there was always this fear, will the wire snap or will the filament? So they used to say, no, the bulb has a filament which can bear the 100 watt, but wire still could snap, because the current could not, so much current could not flow through. Now we have so much possibility and capacities. Why? Because that wiring has been changed. So lower nature, the currents of lower nature flow into these three inferior modes, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas, because the soul in its nascent stage cannot bear, nature cannot bear that, it has to have that nodal point. So when the soul develops and becomes a full-fledged psychic being, then there is a possibility that this current of the higher nature can transform Tamas into self-existent peace, Rajas into conscious force of the divine, and Sattva into the delight and wisdom that is operating in creation. So this is the basic plan that Sri Aurobindo offers to man. We will see in this hints of different aspects of Dvaita, the schools of Indian philosophy. There is Vedanta in it. Sri Aurobindo also says there is one reality. Just as Advaita says. But his Advaita is not confined to that one reality minus creation. He includes the creation, like the Chatuspad Brahma, but takes it to its ultimate limit. There is also in it Vishishtadvaita, in the sense we have our ultimate Soham Asmi, he is an ultimate truth. But this does not negate manifestation, just as the divine creates and enters into creation. He does not negate it. So we too can live like him. So this is the second aspect. This is also the Advaita aspect, the love and adoration of the finite soul for the infinite. So all these three schools of philosophy find here different aspects. Sankhya, of course, is a little incomplete because it speaks of only 2 points and not the third one. And the Gita brings in that element of Purushottama, which is very much there in Sri Aurobindo's yoga. But there is also in Sri Aurobindo's yoga something which is missing in all these schools, which are primarily Vedantic, and it is that aspect of Tantra. Vedantic schools explain the relation of soul with nature and soul with the divine. But they do not explain nature. Nature is either Maya, or it is Leela, or it is Prakriti. These are the 3 poises. There are different ways of looking at it. Prakriti, when it comes to the individual Purusha, generally it is considered as Jad. But if you look at the operations of Prakriti, it doesn't look like Jad. Behind Prakriti, beyond Prakriti, it is Maya. Brahman, who is one and indivisible, it creates a sense of divisibility. And beyond it, of course, it is Shakti, which the Tantra tried to discover, which was a wonderful attempt. But again, it took us through the road of nature, but ultimately Shakti was meant to liberate us into the that ultimate absolute. So the meaning of creation, why we are here, are we just tied just like that? Are we just like Sunashe bound as a sacrificial goat to be sacrificed at the altar of the forces of nature? What is the meaning and purpose of it all? If ultimately we had to return back to the origin, then why there is all this big drama, not just a small little drama? This analogy of wave and ocean is very nice. If our existence was like a wave, we came out of the divine, within 2 minutes we went back. This is wonderful. But it is not just 2 minutes, it's ages. And those ages are not simple. We have to go through the real adventure. So surely there is a deeper purpose and meaning, and that deeper purpose and meaning we find not in the traditional Vedanta. Traditional Vedanta is ultimately its moksha, liberation from the state of bondage. But moksha in Sri Aurobindo's yoga is a first step to entering into the fullness of the manifestation. What we see is an incomplete manifestation. Man is a transitional being, that's what Sri Aurobindo says, and the manifestation has to become complete, perfect. It should become as perfect as what we find at the heights and deep within. So the divine perfection has to be manifested here, rather than we have to annul ourselves by joining the divine perfection. So he completes the whole cycle of evolution. To say that the soul must free itself from nature is wonderful, but it doesn't complete the cycle of the soul's evolution. What is the next step? It enters into creation as a Jivan Mukta, works as an instrument or channel of God, but this also does not complete it. Next is that this Jivan Mukt state of the soul, which has developed to its fullness, also is expressing itself through a transformed human nature. Then we can say that Soham Asmi in the real sense. Not only in my soul I am one with the divine, but even in my nature I am one with the divine nature. So we have this Sadharma Gati, Sayujya Gati, Salokya Gati and Samipya Gati. All these 4 kinds of liberation come through this yoga, taking the cue from the Vedantic lore. So this in brief and nutshell is the vast canvas of Sri Aurobindo's yoga philosophy on which the yoga is based. It is based on his own experiences. He had the experience of the Maya. He speaks about it. He had the experience of Shri Krishna very intimately. He had the experience of the Sharo, Bhav, Akshar and the Purushottama. He had the complete experience of the Tantra through all this Kundalini and all the powers which came to him often unasked for. And thereby, when he created a synthesis, he basically took all these incomplete strands in Indian philosophy and took them to the grand reconciling joining point. And what is that joining point? Where world and God grow true and one. Brahma Satyam na mithya, Jagat Satyam na mithya. Leelarth, the Jagat is for the Leela. And we have to remember we are Anandasya Putraha, Amritasya Putra. And just as God is manifesting himself in the world, we as his portions must participate in this divine project to manifest him. So we become co-sharers of his divinity. To end with this line from Savitri, His nature we must put on as he put ours. And that's the secret of the avatar, which you don't find in typical traditional Vedanta. His nature we must put on as he put ours. Our life is his human portion. We must grow divine. Our life is a paradox with God for key. In God, these are reconciled, our mind divides. This is this state of Brahman, that. From that, discard it, enter into that. It's the division created by the mind between creator and the creation and the absolute. But in the experience of the absolute, there is no such division. He can withdraw from creation if he likes, but it is he who has entered into creation and flows with every nerve and cell and atom of existence. So I don't want to prolong the monologue, so let's have the interaction. Some questions are here which I'm not sure if they have already been answered, but if you want, we can take them up as you wish. Nandan Bhai, so
Yes.
should we take these questions
Yes.
which are already there with me?
Yes. I think, shall I read out those questions for your benefit?
Yes, as you wish,
Yes.
because
Dr. B.R. Bheed, a great scholar of Sri Aurobindo's works, has these questions. His first question is as follows. In the synthesis of yoga, in page number
Right.
341, Sri Aurobindo clearly says, from our point of view, these, that is the Virat, the Hiranyagarbha, Prajna, and the
Chatushpad Brahman.
Turiya, are practical distinctions made with the mind, which have a value for certain purposes, but no ultimate value. But in Savitri on page 680 and 81, Sri Aurobindo tells that in him the fourfold being bore its crown. Beginning from this line, he goes on to explain the Virat, the Hiranyagarbha, the Prajna, and the Absolute
Yes,
appeared before
yes,
Savitri, all inculcated in oneself. Had they been
yes.
created, therefore the question is here, had they been created by mind, how could they appear inculcated in the Supreme Self, the two before Savitri, who vanquishing the death had stood alone facing the Lord of Lords, the Paramatma? Do you not
Yes,
think that
so
these
I'll
statements are
first.
contradictory?
So that I think I already answered. What he is speaking of the distinctions that the mind draws, if you see that whole passage, it starts with the old sannyasa. So sannyas, the mind of the sannyasin, mind creates a distinction that they are separate and distinct. There is no distinction as far as the divine reality is concerned. But the mind creates a distinction. It's not that mind has created pragya, mind has created hiranyagarbha. No, he's not saying that. These are self-existent realities which Sri Aurobindo very much, not only in Savitri, several places he has spoken about it, but the mind has created a distinction, a division between the waking and the dream and the pragya and the absolute. What Sri Aurobindo is saying is that while these distinctions have a certain practical utility, means how do things enter into the physical world? They enter through the dream world. So it has a practical distinction that, at the most outer level, we can say that, well, what we dream, the dreams of today and imaginations of today are earthly realities of tomorrow. So it has a practical point. But we should not believe that the waking world and the dream world, they are completely, either diminished realities, or they have ultimately nothing to do with the transcendent Brahman who alone is. So in fact, the traditional thought contradicts. So the Upanishad has shown all of them as one reality, though it has not said what is happening through these layers, but it has shown very clearly they are one reality. But the sannyasin created a distinction. The distinction was that, well, all these are one Brahman, but you have to dwell upon the absolute Brahman who is other than, which is Turiya, this samadhi, this withdrawal into samadhi. Now, this is what Sri Aurobindo is saying. It is a division created by the mind. In the divine, there is no such distinction because he is one. He is as much one when he is into the least atom of existence. That is what the other Upanishad says when it says, out of the full came the full. And yet, if you subtract it, yet it remains the full. Purnameva vashishyate. So that is what he is reminding us, that all this is one Brahman. The waking, the dream, the causal, that is the perceptive world, waking world, the dream world, and the causal world, and the beyond, they are one reality. So that's why it is the true Advaita. It is not ultimately a monism which discards this experience. So that is what Sri Aurobindo says. So in fact, Sri Aurobindo heals the contradiction which the mind of man has made by its excessive tendency towards samadhi. which is what at least I had found in most of the spiritual literature, that ultimately it is samadhi. Ultimately it is samadhi. And this used to be my question. If a samadhi is ultimate and merger with the divine, then why this world has been created? Till I too read this Upanishad, that the Chatushpad Brahman, it was like an eye opener. And then, yes, Sri Aurobindo says that all this is one Brahman. And the Gita puts it so beautifully. We are trying to follow the reverse path. But from the divine point of view, it's the Ashwath tree. From top, it is spreading out. So we have to become one with that reality, without a doubt. But becoming one with that reality is not through a withdrawal into that state of samadhi, absorption, wherein we discard the world, but we have to become one with it while living conscious, and even in the waking consciousness, manifest that reality. So this is the difference, and that's how the contradiction is healed.
Here is the second question of Dr. B. Of course,
Yes.
your answer to the first question has explained partly a part of this question. But still, there is another aspect which you may
Yes.
please discuss. Let me read out the question. The concept of the evolution of consciousness and the other members following it evidently holds good only to the state of waking, because evolution does not apply to other three states, Swapna, Shushupti, and Turiya. Then does it not mean that Sri Aurobindo's philosophy is interested in explaining or elaborating only waking state rather than the other three? And if he were to extend this concept of evolution or the transformation up to the Brahman itself, then does it not fall into the category of anti-Vedic philosophy? Because the Vedanta philosophy evidently negates any parinama or transformation with the Brahman. Or why can this not be placed side by side with that of the Sankhya? That is Sheshwar Sankhya, Ishvara Sahita Sankhya, Mimamsa.
Okay, so I think this is very simple. So evolution is not only of the material nature, the waking state. There is also an inner evolution. There is the soul evolution. So if we look at in the Vedantic idea, evolution is not what we read in the Western literature, which is only evolution of forms. But in Vedantic idea, there is a parallel evolution which is going within. That's why the 84 lakh yonis or whatever comes into existence is that there is the soul which is growing through different forms till it reaches a point of development where it can perceive and conceive the divine. If there was no inner evolution going on, then the first life would have been enough to realize the divine. But the reason why there is life after life, through death we grow towards an evolutionary phase, which is what the Upanishad, Isha Upanishad says so beautifully. It says, avidyam mrityum tirtva vidyam amritam asnute. So, there is an evolution which takes place in avidya, and there is an, further which is in vidya. So the soul must first realize what it is, who it is, by going through the doors of death. So this is the first part. Evolution is not only referring to the waking state, but the dream state. Even our real life, we realize it. So when we grow in consciousness, don't our thoughts and feelings in the dream world change? Of course, I understand that Hiranyagarbha is not just about my thoughts and dreams and feeling, which entire thing is still a play within the ego. But then if we go even deeper than that, there is the idea force which begins to change. And where does all this idea forces that changes come from? So they are coming again from the same, because there is only one creator. Hiranyagarbha, as he describes, the author of thoughts and who creates even in his omniscient sleep. So it is evolution of material nature is the last thing that he is speaking about, is the final tangible result. But ultimately the soul must first evolve and arrive at its oneness with the divine. Then based on that, there is the first step. Our inner consciousness must change and be transformed, which is the equivalent of the Hiranyagarbha, and then the outer manifested universe must evolve. He is not speaking of transformation of Brahman at all. Brahman is a state of consciousness, and it is the stable basis behind all things. Surely he is not speaking of transformation of Brahman. He is only speaking of transformation of nature and the instruments built by nature, and the consciousness which is circumscribing itself in an individual. That's all he's speaking about. Brahman is the basis. There is no transformation of Brahman. So what he's speaking about is that as an individual, we experience the one consciousness in a very limited way. That's what is ignorance. And this limitation is due to ego. And we are bound by it through ignorance and desire. This is common to all Vedantic philosophy. So we have to get free from that. Now there are different ways of getting free from that. But what happens when we get free from that? We enter into the larger cosmic consciousness. But there also the ignorance pursues us. So now he is asking us to take the next step, that out of cosmic ignorance we must enter into cosmic truth, and then we will realize that still greater, individual, universal, and the transcendent state. So he is actually giving a new sense to evolution, that in Vedantic idea, evolution of the individual soul arriving at moksha. But is not each soul ultimately from the deepest reality interconnected with all the souls? Are they separate realities? So this is the last sattvic illusion, that I am separate from X, Y, Z, and my liberation should be my concern. So it becomes a very egoistic, selfish approach where we are each busy with our own evolution. But there is a collective dimension to existence, and each soul is a portion of the eternal. And therefore he brings in that element of the individual soul, arriving at the universal consciousness, individual freedom, then the cosmic consciousness, and then of course the transcendent. All three as one. Transcendent is the eternal source. From there we must draw the power to change things. Now, of course, it's different that Divine Mother has made it easy. But even in Savitri, what does she do? She goes right up to the ultimate. But what does she do in that ultimate? She is given a choice to merge herself. But instead, she chooses the boon for earth and man. It's a beautiful, I think page 666 is the four boons of Savitri, where she brings that consciousness, that which is beyond the manifest and the unmanifest, that possibility which is still hidden in the absolute. That possibility which can transform earthly life. So the concern is about this, because this is where the problem lies. There is no problem. There we can easily go. The problem is here. So it is here that she brings that consciousness. So it is the transformation of our inner consciousness, of nature, of the gunas, of the instruments created by nature ultimately, body, brain, everything, so that the nirbad, that is the word, unobstructed play of the divine Shakti, no more diminished by the lower nature, apara prakriti, can take place through human vessels, which will no more be human but transmuted divinely human vessels. So this is the thing he is speaking about. And
the third question is about a grammatical aspect pertaining to a few lines of Savitri. Dr. B
see, that is
quotes a few lines from Savitri from page number 524. I will not read it out fully. Only the first two lines let me read out. On the walls covered with significant shapes, looked at her, the life scene of man and beast, and the high meaning of the life gods, and so on it goes. And then he asks the question in the context. The last line is hieratic message of the climbing plains. Then he asks this question against the background of these lines of Savitri. In the above lines, which do you think is the main subjective class? Therefore, I told it's a grammatical aspect, a grammatical question relating to some lines. I don't see any appropriate subject or noun class for the verbs looked and spoke in the text. There is no problem in deriving the general meaning of the text. It can be done easily also. But I want a clear grammatical explanation for this. Please allow.
See, this is, I can answer, but as he said, from the general meaning, with regard to Sri Aurobindo's English, I can only say, compared to any of us, his mastery over the English language was so perfect. So if we are not able to find, all that we can say is that there is no grammatical error. But what is, probably, one has to learn more about grammar and understand that a general meaning I can easily derive. That, when we look at the subject, who is the subject in that state of consciousness where one is going through the entire hierarchy of the planes? That's where, there is the in-look. So who is the subject? The subject is only one subject. He need not be something visible, tangible. So the subjective clause, he looked or he saw, that is not there. Obviously it is missing. But there is the one subject which alone exists. So this way we can understand. But I would not like to comment actually on Sri Aurobindo's English. I remember V.K. Gokak saying something very interesting when he was asked again about Sri Aurobindo's English. He said something wonderful, that it is not English that Sri Aurobindo speaks. What Sri Aurobindo speaks is English. He has given a lot of new aspects to the language itself. So, in all humility, I would say that, well, what Sri Aurobindo speaks in English, even just purely from the outer point of view, if there ever is, men like Bertrand Russell, who read his English, said, this is something so beyond me. So, as an English expert, there have been many people who have tried to understand his English. But I suppose that's, as he's rightly said, that's not the important part. We can enter into not only that, there are several places in Savitri where people speak about the comma and the full stop. But, I leave it at that. Let Sri Aurobindo explain his own English, because he only can say where is the subject. It's a purely grammatical question. So, yeah, I would not elaborate on this. To elaborate on this would be for me like, trying to analyze the master's language. So my heart would not, sanction this. Okay? So we can go
Yes.
to the next question. Yeah.
Now, I shall be taking up the questions of another scholar, Sri
Yeah.
Jatavedaji.
Yeah.
His first question is about the nature of Sri Aurobindo's philosophy. He
Yes.
says, in ultimate analysis, however we may call Sri Aurobindo's philosophy as integral Advaita, does this philosophy, that is Sri Aurobindo's philosophy, imply dualism?
So, as I said, that it is all of the above, or here in this context, both of the above and none of the above. So, he does believe in the individual existence of individual souls, which are finite souls, and yet they are immutable in this ultimate sense of the word, in the sense that they are indestructible. But he believes in the evolution of the soul to develop into a full fledged psychic being. So, both aspects are there, and plus something else. So, if there is the dualism, the soul is a portion of the divine. So, to that extent, which wants to unite with the divine, it unites with the divine, and yet it is meant to be a unique mode of expression of the infinite. So, if I have to take these three schools which exist, I would not say that it is dualistic, but if at all, remotely a school of philosophy comes close to it, it is Visishtadvaita, which is the qualified monism, that there is the essential unity of the soul. And as far as soul is concerned, yet it is a unique mode of expression of the divine, of the one. So, to that extent, yes. But then there is a lot more. So, that will be to oversimplify it. So, as I said in my initial presentation, all the three aspects are there. And there are three different ways, isolated ways of looking at things. But Sri Aurobindo not only leaves it as Visishtadvaita, as some people like to call it, that there is the soul which is an eternal portion of the divine and it has to realize itself, but also it is a unique mode to express itself. It takes it many steps further, because in Visishtadvaita you have to still ultimately find the moksha. But here it is about becoming the channel and instrument for the manifestation of the divine for the sake of the Leela. This we don't find in any of the schools. Even the dualistic school or the non-dual, obviously not. But the closest that comes is the Visishtadvaita. But even there, ultimate goal is moksha. So none of them would really apply to Sri Aurobindo. We have to look at him afresh and seek the answers to the real question. The real question is not philosophy but life. Life is full of suffering, pain, evil. What is it due to? It's very nice that there is a perfect consciousness out there. But what is this due to? One answer, monism, Maya. So who created Maya, which seems so real? Dualistic consciousness, soul is attracted to the divine. But all this experience, is it only to impel us to attract toward the divine, as some people would say? Which would sound very absurd, that we go through all this suffering and pain and evil, so that eventually we may feel drawn towards him. So that again, the field of nature remains absolutely a strange situation. And again, the integral Advaita, where there is not integral Advaita, that's not the right way to look at it, but the Visisht Advaita, where there is the eternal portion, and yet we have the unique mode of presentation of the divine. That may come a little close, but what is the purpose? That is not there in any of them except moksha. Moksha in Sri Aurobindo's yoga is the first step. So this is how we have to look at it. Yeah.
There is a related question of Sri Jatavedaji. He says, sometimes I feel Sri Aurobindo is unnecessarily expanding the journey of the soul, whereas Upanishads command us to attain here and now.
So, the command for attaining here and now is only that the soul wakes up and realizes the divine. But then the whole question is, why all this drama? Here and now is fine. That we realize that is definitely that particular aspect is the easiest. I mean, not as easy as, but it is the easiest part. And Sri Aurobindo also speaks of that. It must wake up to realize what it is. But does the matter end there? The Upanishad ends there. That is the problem. So, soul has realized individually. What about the work that is there? What about the field in which it is there? What about the countless beings who are suffering and in pain and evil? Do we just give them some humanitarian service, some kind of aid, free hospitals, schools? So that makes an absurdity of this whole creation. So Sri Aurobindo's entire expansion is primarily to speak about the transformation of nature, the instrument which has never been done. And that's not even been conceived. So he has to expand upon all this, but expand it on the basis of the already existing schools of yoga and Vedanta. Of course, there are people who don't need that. They just are concerned about what this world is and why it is the way it is. They don't need to go through these schools. They understand that, well, there has to be some connection with the divine in some way. So he gives us a sense of it. So when we look at all the pages of Sri Aurobindo, he gives us a new outlook, because he's dealing with manifestation. He's not speaking of the soul awakening to the divine reality. That is the easy part. But then that doesn't explain anything about anything. Why this manifestation? Why this evil? Why this suffering? What are the stages? What is this rebirth theory? Why do we have to go through death, rebirth, and go through that complicated, long-standing process again and again? There are many aspects of manifestation, even education, sports, I would say, eating food, sleeping, everything is manifestation. So if you have to explain manifestation, then you have to elaborate. If you have to explain nothing and say, well, my soul is a portion of the divine and I wake up, fine. Though it's not as easy as that, because maybe when we wake up, God may well say that, well, there was a purpose why you went there, and you're very happy waking up. So, what did you do for God's purpose beneath the stars? That is the question that he takes up. And it's all about manifestation. But manifestation without the divine has no meaning. So he has to connect it with the creator, because so many, cobwebs have come into our mind. So we believe that, manifestation is meaningless, it is illusory, it is maya, it is unreal, it is like a wave collapsing into the sea. I've heard these things. And I've often wondered if it's as simple as wave collapsing into the sea. It's very easy to say. But as a physician, I encounter people. Well, one can say all this is an experience of Maya. One comes out of it. But then it's an extremely selfish way of looking at the entire phenomenal world. And maybe it works with some. I mean, I don't say that it is a wrong way of looking at it, but to me it looks very, very selfish. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as a doctor, I've seen. So, that apart, but we see in life, real life. So, we need to understand why Creator allowed this. So, that's where the involution and evolution, the entire thing comes. That why this enigma and what is its end point? Where is it leading us? If it was, my whole question was, if it was ultimately to arrive at, I wake up and realize, then the question is, who put me to sleep? I would like to know. Who trapped me in this dream world of all kinds of unrealities where good and evil are walking side by side, and one day he says, wake up from sleep. So there are a lot of philosophies like that, which say that, there was Kal, there is Maya, which has put us into it, and God, time to time, there are saints who come and, rescue us. But then it gives a lie to the Creator, because when we give a lie to creation, we give a lie to the Creator. It makes an absurdity of it. So if it appeals, it appeals. But to me, it doesn't appeal. And to many people, it doesn't appeal simply because it doesn't tell us about our existence. This withdrawal from life and creation is a possibility. Upanishads speak about it. But then it's something which does seem, to the deeper innate sense in us, an extremely selfish possibility. So that's what here it is about the...
Let me go to the third question of Sri Jatavedaji. He says, in integral Advaita, what is the starting point of involution and what is the end point of evolution? As per integral Advaita, what happens when soul or Kaitya Purusha attains perfection? The involution is complete, but the evolution is incomplete, as it is not reaching the starting point of involution. That is how he presumes. Therefore, he asks a question whether Sri Aurobindo has done complete justice to evolution from this point of view.
No, no, it does complete. It cannot, without. Sri Aurobindo speaks of reclaiming the individual, cosmic, and the transcendent. All three states, the soul must realize itself. So it does complete itself, but it doesn't fuse into it. As he puts it like this, that our purpose is not to lose ourselves in the divine perfection, but to manifest. Without that, there is no way that transformation can take place. So Sri Aurobindo does speak of completing the soul's evolution to the starting point, which is the original impulsion of the divine, and to dwell in that state. And now that original impulsion we have to embody, and not the impulsions of the lower nature. So obviously he does complete. As you rightly passingly said, it's an assumption. Without that, it's impossible. If we are in ignorance, we can at best become ignorant instruments of the divine. And well, that is good. Like karma yoga, we prepare ourselves. But one has to realize the individual divine within, the cosmic divine, and the transcendent divine, and the essential unity of all these three. Without that, there is no no participation in transformation. Of course, it's a long journey. So Sri Aurobindo takes into account all of them. So yes, he does speak of arriving at the point from where the involution began. But he doesn't end with there. That is the difference. He ends up with embodying that original impulsion. So I can put it like this, that imagine, somebody begins to speak and has a, stammering language. Ultimately he wants to learn music. He goes, ultimately is to learn music from Shiva himself, and he has learned music. So should he live with Shiva forever? Or he should come back and express this music upon earth. So he should express, but how can he express the music of Shiva if his instruments are not ready? So that's where the whole difference comes. We have it in the story of Ganges. There are many beautiful stories in Indian thought which speak about it. The story of Ganges is again the same story, that all the Gandharvas, they have become distorted because, people on earth are, distorting the ragas. So they say we can't help it because there is a reciprocity between the world and the subtle worlds, gross and the subtle. So they go to the causal, where we have the Shiva, and when Shiva starts singing and dancing with the perfect raga, the divine perfection, if we may use the word, it's a way of looking at the story. Then Vishnu has the beautiful bhavas, divine bhavas, and Brahma takes that divine bhava in his Kamandalu as the divine material for creation, something which has not existed. And then the Ganges had to come down all the way and then redeem earth. So we have to reach that point of the origin, but return back to redeem the earth. This is the big difference. It's like going into space and seeing wonderful possibilities. Second, returning from there, bringing in the internet. It's just a very, crude example. So he completes it and takes it to the next level. Yes.
The last question of Sri Gatavejadi is here. I assume that he is asking this question from the standpoint of those who start reading Sri Aurobindo and may find it difficult to understand the concept of a supermind and so on. So, standing in their shoes, I suppose he is asking this question. Does Sri Aurobindo compel us to dwell in a fantastic imagination of supposedly unrealistic goal of supermind?
Okay, so I'll answer this from the standpoint of, that question. I can answer it that, about the reality of the supermind and everything. This charge is made even about Upanishadic Brahman realization, even about the soul. There are any number of materialistic thinkers in the West who say that the soul is all imagination. They say that rebirth is all imagination. There are any number of individuals who say that Brahman reality is all imagination. So there is no end to imagination. But where then does imagination cease? If supermind is a fantastic imagination, then so is Brahman, so is God, so is divine. None of these are so tangible. One has to labor to reach there. It's not about a mental concept. The soul is imagination till we have realized it, or a belief. So who would be happy with a belief? Therefore, Sri Aurobindo gives us a path to realize it. So it's not a philosophy but also a yoga. See, Vedanta is a philosophy born from yoga. We can realize it by yoga, or we can end up with a belief system. So belief system is not, to a typical materialistic thinker. I used to believe as an agnostic at some point of time that these are very fantastic things. There is a soul which is immortal, but I see I'm operating upon a body. So there is no end to what fantastic imagination could be. But let me answer at this point. If it is a fantastic imagination, it is worth giving all of oneself to the fantastic imagination with complete faith in the tapasvi of tapasvi Sri Aurobindo than to live in this either dull drab reality, which we call as real, or be attracted towards a nirvana about which equally we don't know whether, I mean, from this standpoint, I mean, okay, one becomes aware of it through experience, but about which from this point one doesn't know. Then what is the option left? There are two options. One, either I put all my eggs in this material basket which is going to anyways crash. If this body is all, then actually nothing makes sense. All this discussion, philosophy, Advaita, Dvaita, mysticism has no meaning if I start with the presumption that bodily appearance is all and all else is imagination, because then one has to start from there unless one has realized. Then there is no end to that state, and that makes no sense at all. And other option is, well, I explore if there is a beyond. Now that is where one starts by taking the word of somebody who has found it. That's what the Upanishad says. So now there are masters who have realized things and they give us a path. So to start with, it may sound fantastic, but then there is a master who has realized these truths and he is giving us a possibility. Now there are other masters who say equally that no, supermind is too much. Come into the bandwagon of Brahman and seek personal salvation. Now, if I have to choose, I would choose the transformation because this is too selfish for me. But there are people who feel that it's worth trying. It's a question of faith in the master who has realized and given us a path. The paths are different. If one has to realize the union with the Brahman and disappear from creation, this is valid. Aurobindo himself says that there is a possibility like that. There are souls which seek that withdrawal and it's fine with them. And they trust in the master who has brought, they also don't know. So that's why faith in the master is the first condition for any such realization. Otherwise, from the material, we live with bandaged eyes, bandaged with ignorance. We don't see anything. I don't see beyond the tip of my nose. I don't know what may happen tomorrow. Aurobindo speaks about Trikal Drishti. And there are several examples in his own life. So when we look at his life, read about his life, we understand what this means. But supposing somebody doesn't have that Trikal Drishti, one would say that, well, maybe by chance, by coincidence, you came to know what may happen tomorrow. But with all our knowledge, we can't see beyond the tip of the nose. But what really is supermind? What is so difficult? Supermind is the omniscience and omnipotence of God. Is it not operating everywhere in creation? Any which part we take, we do take that the Ishvara and his Shakti and the divine is omniscient, omnipotent and omnipresent. This is a fundamental thing. The only thing is adding to that is what is the purpose of this omniscience, omnipotence and omnipresence which is taking place in this creation. Because if he is really omnipotent and omnipresent and omniscience, then we should not find this evil and suffering. So that he explains the manifestation is not yet over. So supermind that way is something which we have grown up with mother's milk. We didn't know it is supermind. But when it is said God is omniscient, omnipotent and omnipresent, he is everywhere, he sees from everywhere. We are not using the word supermind, but we are speaking of that. Why Aurobindo uses a new word, apart from the mystic lore and other, there are several reasons, is because though we believe that there is omniscience, omnipotence of God, omnipresence of God, yet in our consciousness we lived with division. There is this life which is outer life, but his omnipotence and omniscience is only to withdraw me or time to time help me through intervention. So he's bridging the gulf that no, this omnipotence and omniscience is operating in creation. He gives examples at material nature at every level. How this omnipotence and omniscience is working. Several of my talks I have spoken about it. You pick up an atom and you will see omniscience which is working. And the omnipotence which is working. That entire galaxy. So supermind is everywhere. There is nothing fantastic about it. It is the mind of the mind. What does the Kena Upanishad speak about? It doesn't use the word supermind. It says the mind of the mind. Yan mansana manute yenahur manovatang tadeva brahmantam vidhi nedam yadidam upasate. Only he brings in this angle that which is the mind of our mind, instead of withdrawing into it, you find it. Don't live within this narrow little, dabba of the mind, and opening to that, manifest and express it in life and creation. That's the new thing he is bringing. And for that, the overmind experience and the supermind, when we look at that mind beyond the mind through the layers which are beyond our rational mind but not yet into the ultimate reality, we still believe there is a schism. What is Yajnavalkya saying when he says, Hiranmayana patrena satya syapihitam mukham tattvam pushanna pavranu satya dharmai drishta? He is invoking the sun. Your face is covered with a golden lid. That's not fantastic imagination of Isha Upanishad. What is the Rishi saying when he says Vidyancha Vidyancha Yasta Dvedo Bhyam Saha? It's the same truth that they are trying to say. It's an old project. The Vedic rishis were trying to arrive at that power, that ultimate truth, consciousness, which can transform earthly life. And they reached pretty high, Swarlok, with the faculties of revelation, inspiration, intuition, right action, rhythm, all this they could reach. Sri Aurobindo is taking it to the ultimate level because they saw that door and they saw that reality, the supermind. They speak about it. But opening the lid, earth was not ready. And though rishis could reach that point, and they were not imagining things, at least I do believe now that they were not imagining things. They entered into the truth, the right, the vast. But the final opening of the door, Sri Aurobindo does. So he calls it supermind. And if the door is opened, what is impossible for God to... Again, I would take a real, a very realistic approach. If God is omnipotent and omniscience, I'll take a logical approach. Can he change me into his own divine nature? If he cannot, then he is not omniscience and omnipotence. Well, there would be conditions, I understand. But if fundamentally he cannot change earthly life, then where is the omnipotence of the omniscience? Can he limit his omnipotence? If we say he cannot, then again he is not omnipotent. So what are we? It is the divine who has limited his omnipotence and omniscience. And there is a purpose in it. That's what evolution is. The tree limiting itself into a seed is involution. The seed evolving into the fullness of the tree and not vanishing into space. That is evolution. So that is how we have to look at it. It's very simple. And if there is omnipotence and omniscience of God, if there is an aspiration to change into the divine nature, which is the persistent aspiration of mankind, it is because we are told that the goal is to escape. Therefore, some people feel there is no option. But the ultimate aspiration is for terrestrial imperfection, Ram Rajya or kingdom of heaven upon earth. So he shows us the way that yes, God's omnipotence and omniscience, which is what the divine Shakti or the divine mother is about, can do it. In fact, it's the most logical conclusion. It's from this that the question comes. If he is truly omnipotent and omniscient, why this is happening? So either we say that reality is actually important. It can either be a witness or it can be enslaved. That is where the Sankhya comes in with its imperfect answer. Either it is subject to nature or it can withdraw itself. Then there is no question of the Shakti and there is no transformation. But if he is omnipotent and omniscient, transformation of nature and earthly life is the most logical thing. Because if at the root of creation there is the omnipotence, omnipresence and omniscience, then ultimately that is going to emerge. As is the seed, so is going to be the tree. If it is the divine who willed Ekoham Bahushyam, as we find in the Kathopanishad, then it has to become like divine. So it is very logical to understand. But yes, ultimately it's a question of faith. And I prefer, if talking of imagination metaphorically, I prefer the imagination of the remote, distant possibility than this sordid, nightmarish imagination. Because ultimately, even this physical world that we experience through the senses, from a purely intellectual point of view, is nothing but imagination. It could equally be said. Because ultimately the senses are weaving reality. So if that is an imagination, then that is at least I would prefer I'm saying from the complete ignorance point of view, that is a better imagination. Imagine beautiful things rather than imagine this sordid earthly reality, or imagine an individual hasty escape into an imaginary reality which is actually a non-reality nothingness. That sounds illogical. Okay? So...
next question is about the concept of Kaitya Purusha. Though there are four aspects, there are four different questions, I will consider them as four different aspects of the single question. So I will read out all of them together. Gita talks about the concept of Kshara Purusha. If Kshara Purusha means something which is modifiable, what is the difference between Kshara Purusha and Chaitya Purusha, which also evolves? Here, can we equate a modifiable entity with an evolving entity. Second aspect of the question, can we consider the concept of psychic being as a unique contribution of Sri Aurobindo? Third, is it possible to synthesize Dvaita, Visishtadvaita, and Advaita by using the concept of psychic being? And last aspect of the question, can the concept of psychic being be viewed as a kind of missing link that solves the apparently conflicting standpoints of the three main schools of Vedanta philosophy, that is Dvaita, Visishtadvaita, and Advaita?
Okay. So I think I've already touched upon this, but just to slightly more make it precise. So Shar Purusha, Akshar Purusha, and the Purushottama, Uttama Purusha are the three poises of the divine. And the same thing the soul also experiences. As I said, it can enter into the Sharubhav and it seems to be driven by nature. When it separates itself, realizes that it is distinct from nature for the sake of experiencing its own individual freedom, then it is Sakshi. And then it is the master over nature. It becomes the Ish, Anumanta, and the Ish. So this is how we can draw a parallel. But Shar Purusha is not similar to psychic being. Shar Purusha is the relation of the Purusha and the Prakriti. It enters into the mutable becoming. Divine himself enters into the mutable becoming. And the soul also enters into the mutable becoming. So these are the two truths which simultaneously enter into the mutable becoming. That's why very often we see the image of the divine holding as the baby, the soul within. So both have entered into the mutable becoming. But what is happening? Through this process, why has he entered into the mutable becoming? Because this mutable becoming is the becoming of the same being. This becoming must blossom into the fullness of the divine manifestation. That's why they have entered. So let me put it in a certain figurative way. Both the divine and the psychic or the soul have entered into a big mega divine project. And the project is make this field of inconscience, Kshetra, into a garden of God. Let's put it like that. So in this process, as creation evolves, the soul evolves, and as the soul evolves, creation evolves. So both there is a codependence, like nature. So to take that example that you want to make this field into something very beautiful, you have to build a building. So you want to build a building, you have to get plants. So again, you have to discover those new variety of plants and you have to prepare the field, khad and everything. And as they come, your work also increases. You learn, you grow by this experience and you create this place which is more and more beautiful. So the frightening, nightmarish experience when the ground is horrible and the joyous experience when the field changes into something beautiful. So this is how we have to look at it, that there is a relation between the soul and nature. They are not two separate, but they are one reality which manifests as two distinct poises. And as the soul grows into a fully developed being, when it realizes its own divine possibility, that it is a mode of expression of the divine, then we use the word psychic being. So psychic being is the soul which has put on a full-fledged psychic personality, meaning thereby it is a true mental, true vital, true physical, and not just this ego-bound mental, physical, vital complex. So it puts out a true personality, meaning thereby when its thoughts are completely the thought of the divine, when its love is just the divine love which is using an individual channel, when its life is nothing but a rhythm or the flow of the divine force and not just an individual life, when its very bodily substance is nothing else but the substance of the divine which is beginning to, that's the last change of course, which is beginning to express the divine at the most physical level, the divine ananda, the divine existence, the divine consciousness, which of course is the ultimate. So this is how the psychic being evolves. When it evolves into a full-fledged thing, it puts on a psychic personality which becomes a nodus for the divine manifestation upon earth. That is how one has to understand Shubindo's yoga or the yoga philosophy. So, modifiable entity with the evolving entity. So, as I said, the Sharobhav, what is the Sharobhav? It's a changing, ever mutable nature. But then it leaves us nowhere. Is there something happening in nature? That's where Shubindu brings in, that it is not just the soul which is evolving, but nature too is moving towards its own heights. And we can understand it like, there was a kind of thought at some point of time. Then human thought advances. So that's called evolution. When individually we think better, we are better equipped with greater faculties. So nature has many other faculties which are asleep within it, which it will bring out through this process of evolution. And yes, it's very true that one of the unique contribution of Sri Aurobindo is the psychic being. But this is only one. That this inferior nature, apara prakriti, is a front piece of para prakriti. And it is not forever. We can become directly moved by the para prakriti. To take that example that, the steam engine or the coal engine can upgrade into steam engine, upgrade into electrical engine, diesel engine, electrical engine, and one day solar powered engine. So right now we are moved by apara prakriti, the lower nature, but this lower nature can be transformed and we can become moved by the higher supernature. This is the second important aspect. The third important aspect is the instruments themselves can be transformed, the hands, the feet, and everything, because they have to now receive that higher current. They cannot right now. All our instruments are attuned to lower nature, animal nature, rakshasic nature, asuric nature. They should be transformed first into godlike nature and then the divine nature. So this is the process. Ken Upanishad hints at it, but leaves it at that. So this is this aspect of transformation of nature and instrument one doesn't find in Vedanta, because Vedantic schools are primarily concerned with the relation of soul with the reality and with its eventual liberation. They are not concerned with nature. It's Tantra which is concerned with nature. So Sri Aurobindo combines the two. In fact, he says our yoga starts with the method of Vedanta to the goal of Tantra, which is the fullness, the divine enjoyment. These are all new things. He gives us the real sense of the purpose of the Leela, which is not to escape, but to manifest the divine in all his fullness. He gives us this idea that man is a transitional being. He is not the ultimate of creation from where he is to withdraw into the ineffable. He is a middle transitional state, and there is something greater than man is to come, which is inevitable in the logic of creation. If you look at it, it's very logical. So Sri Aurobindo is ultimately, on many points, there are many unique elements that he brings it. The schools of Advaita philosophy, fundamentally, that there is one reality, yes, it starts from there. And that reality is the omnipresent reality. That is the fundamental truth from where he starts. And then he develops upon it. Nature is conscious force. He develops upon it and takes it to many, many levels which are implicit if we look at closely at these schools, but they have never been made explicit. So this is where we see, yes, psychic being is one of the unique contributions. Is it possible to synthesize Dvaita, Visisht Advaita by using the concept of the psychic being? Even without it, as I said, there are three different ways of looking at one reality. So the psychic being as an eternal portion of the divine, loving the divine, longing for the divine, is Dvaita. The psychic being knowing that it is the eternal portion of the divine, one with the divine, and yet differentiated in manifestation, is Visisht Advaita. The psychic being knowing its utter unity, that I am none else but him, that is Advaita. And all these three experiences come in Sri Aurobindo's yoga and much more. So, as I said, these three schools are three standpoints. But one has to synthesize. One standpoint means one has not had the complete vision. So Sri Aurobindo takes us to that. And yes, the concept of psychic being is the missing link that solves the apparently conflicting. So I won't say that it solves the conflicting schools, because that's not really the purpose of philosophy. But it is the missing link between creation and creator. So all the three schools of philosophy, they do not give us the real sense or the relation between creation and the creator. But the psychic being entering into earth consciousness and evolving through that process and toward the fullness of the divine manifestation is the missing link between the creation and the creator. Otherwise, we see that there is creation, there is Maya, and there is the Brahman. So what about the individual? It is the ego and he is unreal. So it doesn't make sense. So ultimately all the schools, even where you accept the multiplicity of souls, even that is regarded as a reflection, like the sun ray is reflecting. It's not really, really multiple. So then, if there is no individuality, there is no individual soul, then what is the relation between creator and creation? Why did he create all this, and who is really getting freedom? If all this is simply a reflection and not truth. So there are many missing links in philosophy. In the Western philosophy is grossly incomplete, but even in Indian Vedantic philosophy, there are many missing links because the rishis who realized a lot, that last step, they were opening the door. That's where we see struggling with. They've reached that Swarlok. From there they see the Maharlok, that golden lid. But to open it was the big enigma. And Sri Aurobindo enters that door and comes back. And then everything changes. So that's what the supermind is. The Vedic rishis saw it through a glimmering lid. And Sri Aurobindo entered the lid, went beyond, where none would dare to go, in a living body, and comes back. And then he prepares mankind and opens the lid for everyone, which is something very powerful and very beautiful. Okay, so I think we have.
Can we take one or two last questions from those who are participating, Alokji?
Yes, we can take a question, and also we can email, or if people are interested, we can probably some other time
Sir,
have another session.
good evening.
Yes,
Can I
good
ask a question?
Yes, please.
I'm Dr. Chandramouli. Just I want to know that what is the takes on Nimitta and Upadana about the truth, action, and the reality?
Nimit and the
Nimitta and Upadana about truth, action, and the reality.
okay, the reality as we experience or reality as it exists, because our perception of reality is still incomplete. Our senses are yet in the process of developing. So, well, I'm answering it the way I have understood it, that there is an action of truth, but that action in the soul is revealed as a soul impulsion, the Swabhava and the Swadharma. But our senses, our apparatus which nature has built, is not yet ready to manifest that reality. So it gets distorted. So what we look at this world is not an illusion, but it is a distortion. And as our instruments of senses and action get more and more liberated from ignorance, transformed, as our inner consciousness gets transformed, then we'll be able to remove that distortion and experience and participate in this reality as we should, as truth itself participates in it. So that's how one has to understand these two.
What is the Nimitta and Upadana in this?
So Nimit is the instrumental nature. That's what you are speaking of.
No, Nimitta is called actually...
Instrument.
No, Nimitta is intelligence. Upadana is
Okay.
the material thing. I mean,
Yes.
for example,
Yes,
a
which are
carpenter
instruments.
is making a table.
Yes.
His expertise is Nimitta, and wood
Yes.
is the Upadana.
Okay.
Like that, on the truth, action, the reality, what is the takes on this from the Sri
So
Aurobindo?
obviously, as I gave the example of a musician, so we are the carpenter's intelligence and the let's say the wood. They are both yet a limitation. They cannot fully receive the truth and express it. So the carpenter has to upgrade his intelligence to become Vishwakarma, to put it like that, and the wood has to evolve into a substance through which truth creations can be made. Right now, we are not building truth creations because one, our intelligence cannot receive it rightly, and second, the instrument through which it operates, they are very limited. So that's why he speaks about the transformation of nature. So truth action doesn't take place directly and openly in the world. So Sri Aurobindo says that this idea that everything is done by the divine, it is distorted. That's what I was saying. That, it is by a transformation of the inner consciousness, even the intelligence, which is yet not the luminous mirror that can reflect fully the divine light. Therefore, first distortion takes place at the level of the mind or the mental intelligence. Right now, we have the mental intelligence. This mental intelligence has to upgrade itself and arrive at the divine intelligence, the divine knowledge, the divine gnosis, and then the instrument themselves have to be changed to be able to express this divine knowledge, which is truth, into tangible action, into building things upon earth in terrestrial creation.
We can take one last question, I suppose.
Yes.
Kanika, you can ask the question.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir, from the talk this evening, what I've understood is that faith-based evolution is very important to the teachings, and you also mentioned that in death also the soul continues to transform and evolve. So, as a person today, Kanika Kohli, in this life, what is a way to for me to experience a proof of this evolution that over the years or over the lifetimes I have evolved or transformed in my life? What is the teaching and view on that?
That is a very valid question. So, faith is a starting point, it is not the end point. So, anything in life starts with faith. When I study physics, I have faith in my teacher. And then he says that there are ways you can yourself do the experiment and find. So, all yoga is about that. So, the only way we can discover it is not by an intellectual process. But if there is the soul which transmigrates, then we have to discover the soul where the soul memories are embedded. Now, there are indirect evidences which are plenty. Indirect evidences are there that people start, this is a traditional way of explaining that people start at different levels in their inner evolution. That is a fact we observe. There are people who from childhood, like Shukdev, are turned towards higher truths. There are people who are completely submerged in material world, and that's why in Indian thought we had the fourfold order. The evolution from the most physical consciousness to the most higher and higher mental consciousness to a spiritual being. But whether I have gone through this or not, personally, we can discover only when we find the soul. And there is a way to do it. And yes, we should engage in that because that is the only thing worth doing to start with. So, only foolproof evidence will be to discover the soul. Faith is a starting point only. It should not become, otherwise, we'll become another belief system. There is the soul within, it goes through rebirth, reward, punishment, and 84 lakh yoni, none of which will be real to us. We must reproduce it in our own experience. So, thanks to Mother and Sri Aurobindo, they say that there is a way and you can find it, and the people who have found it. So, it's like, but yes, one has to put in effort. It won't happen automatically. That's true. But obviously, to find it, try to find it, there has to be starting point is faith. How will we otherwise even put any effort?
So we will be able to find that out for this life only, but we would not. Is there a way to actually discover?
You will know it. When you touch the soul, you will know about many of your previous lives. Not all of them, but many soul memories you'll know it, precisely because those memories are embedded in the soul. But they are not like, the ego personality will not be remembered. But the soul moments in a particular lifetime, they will be remembered. For instance, you'll not remember that I was this king and that person I was a monkey on the, along the branches. They are fantastic stories. But all the soul moments, so there is a physical memory, there is a mental memory, there is a vital memory, there is an emotional memory, and there is a psychic memory. Psychic memory, which goes with the soul, are those moments when in some way or the other, we connected with a higher reality or a greater reality. And there are corresponding circumstances with that memory. Let's say, for instance, somebody was going to the gallows. At that point, in an intense moment, one experienced some contact. So, if you touch the psychic being, you will remember that moment of going to the gallows. And then you will obviously know who that person was, but not every detail of that life. That is another way of retrieving it, but that's a different, it's a wasted exercise. Equally, one may know a moment when one, while gazing at the sea, had a tremendous opening and an inner experience. And that moment, the dress, maybe the situation, maybe the circumstance, even the where exactly one was, that memory will come back. So like that, one can, thread the entire sequence of lives. But then when you discover the soul, you will also know what you are destined to become. So that's more fascinating because then one wants to know which way one is going and what one is meant to express in the future. That's a much more fascinating thing.
Thank you for mentioning that, sir. Because if allowed, sir, I have one continuing question to follow up for that.
Yes,
sir, so you said that a person will get to know what is the purpose for this life. So I've had several scholarly discussions around that sometimes some people say that they feel that this is their last life and maybe they are going to going for moksha. And you mentioned that Sri Aurobindo mentions that that is the first step, of course. So how does one connect with that? And if someone gets that feeling, how does one transcend to beyond this feeling of moksha and actually achieve something higher than that, or go to the next level?
Well, as I said, it depends upon the individual. First of all, this is the last life only somebody can say, in whom all the desires have been extinguished and the ego sense is gone and the true psychic individuality has come out. Feeling is one thing that everybody believes this is the last life. There is a very nice poem of Sri Aurobindo, and where he says he said, I am egoless free, but swore because his dinner was not ready. Sri Ramakrishna's life, he describes that experience when there was this guru coming with a whole entourage of people, and he said, what does it matter? Myself is free. So whether I am carrying an entourage of women with me, what does it matter? And Sri Ramakrishna is reported to have said, I spit on your Vedanta. Well, it's one thing to say that I am free, but as long as one is still in the grip of ignorance in some place or the other. So if that is what freedom is about, realizing the soul, then many people would say that, claim that I am free, this is nature. And they would be right. After all, if freedom of the soul from nature is the sole object and nature continues the way it is, then it has made no difference to anyone, to me or to anybody else in this universe. And second, it makes this whole journey so purposeless. So if you ask me purely intellectually, then what was the big drama about? If moksha was the end point, to return where we started from, why did we stray into this jungle at all? Why? And this not a very pleasant jungle. If the jungle is pleasant, I understand. But a jungle where there are deadly pythons and energies which are, demonic, why entered into this at all? To go through pain, pleasure, suffering. At the end you say, no, you please come back into moksha. So it gives a lie. It leaves a great lacuna in thought. And human thought cannot be long satisfied with this kind of a half-finished story. So Sri Aurobindo completes that story that no, wait, picture abhi baki hai, drama is yet to come, and moksha is only one step for participating now consciously in the drama or the epic of creation, epic story of creation. At least we discover our own role into it. So yes, but it's okay. Those who believe belief is something which is very individual, and one should not interfere with it. It's perfectly fine, but it makes the whole thing very selfish, and makes this creation seem so absurd. And God Himself a monster, who would devise all these trapdoors, pitfalls, errors, and at the end says, this was Maya. I'm sorry, this was a play of illusions. But you can have moksha. I don't know, my thought doesn't, and my heart has never accepted this. It always found this extremely selfish. But then it's okay, as I said. One has to consult one's own heart and see there. What is the calling?
Thank you for that perspective, sir. I shall delve deeper into that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
We have had a wonderful interaction with Sri Alokji. I invite Sri Ramesh Sargurji to offer our immense gratitude to Sri Alokji.
Namaste and pranams to Alokji. Namaste, sir.
Namaste, namaste, namaste.
We have been listening to your talks very intently, and we have been enjoying your talks on the YouTube. But our aspiration to be with you and our aspiration to interact with you has been made a reality today by the grace of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. We experience the flowing grace through you. We are really grateful to you, indebted to you for taking up all the intricate questions. Most of them are metaphysical, some of them are objections, some of them are confusions. You, through your light of tapasya and Sri Aurobindo's thoughts on all these aspects of the divinity. Unfortunately, human mind places one aspect of the divine against the other and goes on creating a conflict within one divine, which is absolutely illusory, which is not there. Hence the philosophies and the different schools. And today is also a very great, significant day for the people of Karnataka, especially to be with you, because today is June 14th. I don't know why you chose this day. Today is Sri MP Pandit's birth anniversary. Yes, a unique contribution from Karnataka to Pondicherry Ashram. So we are in following his footsteps, and he is our role model. And he has written very, very voluminously on Mother and Sri Aurobindo, and he has also unraveled all the intricate things. Today we experienced it. For Jataveda's question regarding the final duality, whether Sri Aurobindo's philosophy is ultimately dual, is asking. I remembered one thing as you explained. In the ultimate perfection, there is, if you want, Sri Aurobindo says, delight giving duality is there. That is the phrase, quote and unquote. That delight giving duality is actually fulfills the unity. And that is a secret which is beyond the unity towards which Sri Aurobindo and the Mother are leading us. Today it is almost like you have untied the knots of the riddle of the world, connecting the creator with the creation, which is the central problem in all the philosophies, where some of them stand incomplete and cannot answer all the questions which human consciousness is asking in the modern age, which Sri Aurobindo has taken up, and all the questions have been answered. Mother says, if you read the Life Divine completely, almost all the questions will be answered by the time you complete your studies. So we have been making a sincere attempt to study Mother and Sri Aurobindo, but today we are immensely benefited by you, sir. This satsang, of course, acts as an effective and sacred link in the collective evolution towards which the India is emerging. Although the work is not very, very clear on the surface, slowly it is picking up, and slowly the supramental is slipping into the manifestation and preparing the minds, sometimes with our knowledge and sometimes without. So today is really a blessed day for all of us. On behalf of all the participants and aspirants, devotees, sadhaks, jignasus, mumukshus in the satsang today, on behalf of our Sri Mata Aurobindo Purna Yoga Balaga, our infinite pranams to you and to the Mother and Sri Aurobindo in you, sir. Thank you very much. We are grateful to you, sir.